This is not a revolution, but an evolution, Regarding tokenization, it will not replace traditional capital markets. The thing tokenization is designed to do is to upgrade the capital markets. I believe many financial instruments will continue to exist in the same form, but the underlying infrastructure will gradually become digital. The financial system will move fully onto the digital capital market rails. From Serbia's point of view, for emerging markets, this transformation could actually be particularly important.
Welcome everyone to Beyond the Cosmoverse, the podcast where we go beyond the Cosmoverse stage. Today we have a conversation that spans from tokenization to regulation, particularly relevant with what is happening in terms of institutional adoption. Today's guest is Anina Milanović. Welcome, Anina.
Thank you very much, Roberto. Nice to be here.
It's great to have you because actually we were literally speaking at Cosmoverse 2025. You were on stage speaking about building trust in tokenized markets. And it feels that we have been a long way. It's only been 4 months and we are seeing a strong institutional adoption of digital assets. So I actually wanted to ask you regarding Serbia and the adoption of the Digital Asset Act because it was quite ahead compared to the rest of Europe. It was 3 years ahead to MiCA. And you were at the center of that conversation, being a regulator and working at the Securities Commission of Serbia. So can you speak about how it was to be inside the making of a Digital Asset Act?
Yeah, of course. It was, I would say, a hell of a ride. Actually, as we were speaking earlier, Serbia was one of the pioneers regarding the regulation of digital assets because the law was adopted in 2020, entered into force in 2021, which placed Serbia among one of the earliest, I would say, adopters of digital assets and early jurisdiction to globally introduce one comprehensive legal framework for digital assets beside the AML issues. So regarding the mere process, when you regulate something that's completely new, there is no established template, right? At the time, globally, there were only fragments of regulation and they were mostly focused on the AML, on the anti-money laundering aspects. So the challenge was how to regulate something that doesn't fit into anything that was known until then. How to fit it into some existing legal categories. And the approach Serbia took was pragmatic. Instead of trying to force digital assets into some existing securities or payments framework, our law defined 2 broad categories, virtual currencies and digital tokens. And that actually allowed the regulator some flexibility while still ensuring investment protection, of course, and market oversight. In that regard, there is, I would say, a divided competence between the Securities Commission, where I started my I would say, digital assets career, regarding digital tokens. And on the other hand, you have the central bank, which is in charge of virtual currencies. In other words, we try to understand what a token actually represents here in Serbia. Is it an investment instrument? Is it a utility? Is it a payment instrument? And actually, that approach allowed Serbia to be one of the, I would say, rare jurisdictions that explicitly allows tokenization of certain financial instruments under a dedicated regime. Why I say certain financial instruments? Because our current legislation doesn't allow tokenization of equity, or I would say some instruments that are like equity. So basically, we're down to digitalized bonds, which is actually for our market and our economy very, very important. So, of course, once the law entered into force 2021, reality began to test it. Okay, we had our first white papers approved, we had our first issuers. And that was actually the moment when the regulation met the practice and the needs of the market. And actually, the one thing we learned quite quickly was that access to capital through tokenization is extremely valuable, especially for small and medium companies, which should be the backbone of all economies, as we know. But there was one, I would say, not mistake, but that was we were very cautious in the beginning while we were rendering the legislation, and we put some thresholds really, I would say, low. So in order to, I would say, enhance the digital bonds ecosystem here in Serbia, we should unlock the full potential by hiring up those thresholds. For example, the current cap on the volume of the token issuances per project is 3 million euros, and I personally believe that these thresholds should be gradually increased. Because if the goal is to create a meaningful alternative financing channel, this framework must allow a slightly larger issuances.
I want to actually dive deeper on something that you said, because what you said is actually quite impressive, because for the audience to understand that 2021 was when basically the crypto market was having a comeback. So the fact that already in 2021 Serbia was preparing a digital asset act, it means that the preparation was already happening in 2020. Serbia was building a framework on something that wasn't still not sure it actually had a future, which is something definitely meaningful when it comes to building this kind of legislation, especially because you have to adapt to these digital realities. How do you see the gap from the Digital Asset Act compared, for example, to MiCA that came 3 years later? Do you see like a big difference from how they are structured, or there is actually a compatibility?
Actually, there is a compatibility because the same postulates were used when we were rendering the legislation. Actually, MiCA also used the experiences of other countries 5 years ago, that for example, Malta, that rendered their legislation, which was actually our role model. But in comparison to MiCA, our framework is very, very tokenization friendly, and it's flexible. And the thing is, our legislation currently is perfect for specific, I would say, not experiments, but for other jurisdictions to come to Serbia and put their markets into test, you know? You can tokenize very easily your financial instruments here without those, I would say, regulatory barriers that you have in the European Union. I don't know whether you know, Serbia is a country candidate for the European Union. So in some point, we would need to harmonize our legislation with MiCA. We have undertook that the responsibility on us in regards to the European Union, but currently our legislation gives more flexibility and I would say it's more proactive and more tokenization friendly. So I would use this opportunity to invite, I would say, people who have some ideas that they can test it here in Serbia. And actually, currently, I'm working within the World Bank on the Belgrade Stock Exchange, and we are currently doing work on the establishment of digital assets trading platform because, you know, if you want to create the market and you want to create liquidity, there is no use just providing the primary issuance to be like everything easy and ongoing, but you need to provide a secondary market. So Actually, I cannot disclose many details, but I think it's going to be very, very interesting here in Serbia.
This is actually very interesting because it's also aligned with what you said initially, which was that this is actually the year where all these institutions, multilateral institutions like the World Bank, are actually going to operate on chain, which is far different from just being on chain and holdings and digital asset. We are speaking about building the infrastructure that actually allow for digital asset and all the tokenized asset to operate. And how was it for you going from the public sector to the private sector? Because of course it's a big jump, but it's also something where you have a lot of expertise, because being a regulator, being at the center of operating a digital asset framework is an experience that very few people in the world have. So how it was going into the private sector?
Actually, I started out in the private sector. If I look back, my career path was not completely linear because I started as a lawyer. I'm a lawyer by vocation. It's the largest law firm in Southeastern Europe. So my career in the beginning was quite, I would say, normal. I had experiences with extremely valuable transactions. I had means to interact with a bunch of investors and companies that were trying to grow. However, during my university years at the Faculty of Law in Belgrade, I was already fascinated by capital markets. And that's you would say, a little bit unusual for a lawyer, because most of lawyers instinctively run away from economics. But I was intrigued by the intersection of law, finance, and market design overall. So basically, when I had an opportunity, which was opened up to the Securities Commission of the Republic of Serbia, I applied for a position. And at the time, the Commission was expanding its work on capital market development, and it was an opportunity for me to move from, I would say, a private legal practice into public sector. So once I joined, it moved quite quickly. I started working on the regulatory framework first for investment funds, and then, of course, in 2020 regarding digital assets. Over the time, I built a team, and eventually I led the department responsible for international cooperation and development for about 7 years. So actually, that was my I would say, jump from the private sector into the public sector. So the things that was really, I would say, a turning point in my career was 2019, 2020, when we started talking about blockchain and digital assets. That was the first time I discovered tokenization, and of course fell in love with it. So I'm not talking about crypto. Crypto actually never interested me professionally. What interested me was the real-world application of blockchain technology in capital markets. So actually the intersection of capital markets and digital infrastructure. So once I started working on the legislation, I realized that tokenization is I could say the future of the capital markets. So basically, in some point, a couple of months ago, the World Bank reached out, so I joined again the private sector. So I went from the law firm into the regulator, then to the I would say global market development. So I would say back to basics, back to the private sector. So actually, I think the combination of experience in both of the private and the public sector gives me, like I would say, the means to do something with my current role right now, which is to find a way to make our capital markets here in Serbia work. And I think the only way to do that is by doing a transition to the digital assets regulatory framework in total.
No, and this parallel makes absolute sense, especially your focus on tokenization since the very beginning, because also, as you mentioned, the blockchain revolution actually was supposed in the near future to rewrite the financial system and create something that is more efficient compared to the previous framework. Specifically to tokenization, we are now seeing a broader adoption of tokenized asset. And I think, this is of course my assumption, that this was primarily triggered by stablecoins, because at the moment stablecoins started to make billions of volume of transfer across the world, these institutions started to pay attention, and this goes along as well with all this framework starting to build across jurisdiction. And this goes to one of the questions I was very curious to ask you, especially since you made the parallel from crypto to the real world assets. All these frameworks that are now starting to being shaped across the world. We have regulation happening in Hong Kong with license in stablecoins and custodian. Yes. We have, of course, the US that is shaping the Clarity Act. And the Securities Commission of the United States actually released an important statement in the past month, basically bringing clarity to the digital asset market. And as you mentioned,
finally.
I think this one was a long wait for everyone.
Yeah.
And also Serbia was well ahead, as you mentioned before. So this framework, do you see facilitating the future adoption of institutions? Or do you think they still favor the old guard? So the crypto projects that are actually trying to replace those old institutions? Because we are basically at a point where there is this contrast.
No, people are usually talking about revolution, but I always like to underline this is not a revolution, but an evolution. Regarding tokenization, it will not replace traditional capital markets. The thing tokenization needs to do, and it's designed to do, is to upgrade the capital markets. I believe many financial instruments will continue to exist in the same form, bonds, funds, structured products, whatever. But the underlying infrastructure will gradually become digital. What I'm saying, the financial system will move fully through onto the digital capital market rails. And for example, from Serbia's point of view, for emerging markets, this transformation could actually be particularly important. Countries with highly developed capital markets already have large and efficient financial ecosystems, okay? But countries like Serbia with underdeveloped, I always say underdeveloped capital markets is an understatement for here in Serbia. For us, this is an opportunity to I would say, leapfrog. instead of building an expensive traditional infrastructure, we can move directly toward the digital native system. We're talking also about the institutions, not only in Serbia, but worldwide. You can see the developments, you can see the trends, you can see the big institutional players just coming into the, when I say crypto space, I mean in the broader wording. I'm talking specifically about stablecoins and the tokenization rails. So you mentioned institutions are now highly interested in this topic, of course, because of stablecoins. So whenever you see money, you also see institutions coming in. That's I would say normal and natural.
And the main blocker was actually regulation, because for institution to start to adopt the blockchain rails, you actually need framework.
Clear regulation. You need clear regulation. That's the first prerequisite for things to start functioning. Then you need to trust the infrastructure. And as I mentioned, you need to create a liquid secondary market.
And now I think we are in the second step, which is creating the market and infrastructure, because I would say that from a framework and a regulation perspective, we are there now in 2026. And this also goes into the question, considering your experience and your background as a regulator, as someone that saw a digital asset act being shaped, you have probably the advantage when building this infrastructure layer to actually know what needs to be done in order for the project to be approved from regulators. So how is actually that process? Like, how do we evaluate what are the constraints to operate when building something like an infrastructure project?
Yeah, it's very, very hard because you're actually now building a global infrastructure. You're not talking just about domestic infrastructure. You're talking of something that's not like Europe-wide, it's global-wide. Capital Day is extremely mobile. It's transferable, or how can I say that? And investors allocate their funds across jurisdiction constantly, moving it from A to B. And now we have the situation when institutional investors are deciding to invest in crypto or in tokenization. And primarily, it's legal certainty. Then we look at the market transparency and the regulatory credibility. So if a jurisdiction has unclear or inconsistent regulation, capital simply flows somewhere else. So going back to the core question, you need to provide a clear set of rules. I know that is very easy to say, but it's hard to do, especially as I mentioned before, when you're regulating something that's completely new. I think now it's much easier. Of course, it's mandatory for European Union countries that must follow MiCA. So we had that, I would say, flexibility to make our own rules. And the thing we were, I would say, very consistent in doing was to create a regulatory framework which is very clear. That's not very complicated, on the other hand, but very clear for the end user. Okay, this is our first set of legislation, and I think we're going to need to fine-tune it soon. Actually, we have it in plan to make some amendments in the near future.
You actually said something very interesting in the very beginning that caught my attention, which was the fact that this needs to be operating globally, which leads to another blocker, which is every jurisdiction has its own rule, right?
Its own rules, yeah.
There isn't like a cohesive digital asset framework across all the jurisdictions. Actually, any framework has its own rule, and this also leads extra effort for all this institution building, because they need to adapt for each jurisdiction.
For each market, yeah.
Exactly. They need to understand each market. And how do you think this constraint of having this inconsistency across jurisdiction it's right now a blocker to institutional adoption? Or do you think it's something that can be navigated?
It can be navigated. It could be navigated, not easily, but it can. I think we need more experience for now, and we need more, I would say, all of those rules are basically in some core very similar, but when we're talking about the application, it's very, very, very different. Of course, in Europe, you have MiCA, you must follow it, but again, every country has a different set of rules. So basically, I think we need to have a sit and wait approach for now. There is nothing to be gained by forcing it,
In terms of tokenization, what kind of asset you see having the first wave adoption by institution? Is it tokenized deposit? Is it money market fund? Like, what is exactly the asset class that is gaining? Rapidly?
I would say financial instruments or deposits, for example, because their usage is mostly mandated by investors. Basically, everybody's talking about tokenization. I don't know, in 3, 5, 10 years, everything will be tokenized. No, you don't need to tokenize everything. You need to tokenize some maybe assets that were previously illiquid to make them liquid. For example, okay, everybody's talking about tokenization of real estate. That's definitely a path that's going to be more I would say mainstream and etc. But when we're talking about I would say core investments, I would have my bet on tokenized deposits for sure. For sure, and the thing I already mentioned, for especially for underdeveloped countries like ours with smaller economies, I think this is a way in which you can open finance to smaller investors, to retail investors, and in a way democratize the capital markets.
So, and on this note, because we have seen some of the challenging when it comes to build globally. Actually, you have quite an experience also with investor protection. So when an everyday user will start to adopt this kind of instruments, when basically some of this project could fail, and who is going to pay the price in terms of this failure? Do you think there is already actually a step forward also in investor protection when it comes to using this instrument?
But that's the thing. When you have a regulated market, you have the regulator who is behind the market. Actually, the Securities Commission where I worked is a safeguard for market integrity and for investor protection. Of course, you had these, I would say, identical issues regarding classical instruments before even we were starting to talk about blockchain and tokenization and crypto. So this is an issue that is not new and not, I would say, tailor-made for digital assets. I would say the Securities Commission will always try to be a safeguard for the market. That's the thing, by rendering specific rules that are, I would say, built around the idea that the investor should be protected, of course. I know this is a broad answer maybe, but that's a political one, I would say.
No, of course, also coming from, of course, a crypto market that so far has been broadly not protected from an investor standpoint, because rarely the investor have been protected by using all this DeFi project. Actually, I wanted to ask you a question which goes back to your origin story, because you mentioned that you started as a lawyer. Do you see already maybe some of your colleagues that are you still in touch being specialized into specifically smart contract and all the related situation to the blockchain market, or there is still a gap in that sector?
I think the gap is getting smaller and smaller as we speak, because a lot of my ex-colleagues are very, very into, I would say, new technologies and blockchain and smart contracts, and they're currently, I think you have some lawyers that are doing that stuff, of course, because we have the market which is live. But I think we need more work and more education in this manner, and that's why I think interviews like this, I would say raising awareness and raising the level of financial literacy is the key part in making any market viable. And of course, it's not a trend. When you say, I know, people are always talking about buzzwords, trends, blah, blah, blah. I would say digital assets, tokenization, that's a reality, and there's no other thing than going with it and learning it as you go, So back to the start, yeah, lawyers are very into this area right now.
I want to still leverage your experience, because when we met at Cosmoverse 2025, I was surprised of how advanced was your knowledge of tokenization, and this goes a bit from the arrogance, I would say, of us that have been crypto native, that always thought that actually regulators don't understand anything about it. I was actually surprised that you have incredible knowledge of the tokenization and how it works also on the infrastructure layer. So my question is, being in a country that was a first mover, what is your advice for other emerging markets that want to replicate what Serbia did, like based on your experience?
First of all, thank you for the kind words. Yeah, I know there is always that thing that people think that the regulators are not, I would say, don't keep the pace with the industry. But actually, here in the Securities Commission, we were very, very, I would say, proactive in that manner. Actually, my colleague at the time, when he came to me with the whole idea of blockchain and digital assets and Securities Commission being one of the regulators, I was like, what are you talking about? So that's normal. And actually that was the point. I started learning more, reading more, and I really fell in love with the topic. So actually my advice for other emerging countries in this manner would be to basically replicate what we did, make a legal framework which is very, I would say, easygoing and flexible, to make that first step of legal certainty, market transparency, and of course, credibility. You know, you need to have a strong regulator that stands behind that legislation. So, and you should make your legislation tailored for your needs. In Serbia, I always underline the same thing. Access to finance for small and medium enterprises was always an issue. You know, you have some entities, startups that are in principle unbankable. They don't have access to finance. All they can do, they can borrow they can borrow funds from their, I would say, mothers, brothers, and stuff. They can go to the bank. You know, that's crazy. So by making our digital assets legislation tokenization friendly for debt instruments, for tokenized bonds, we opened up a market which will, I'm sure, only grow and grow. So make your legislation tailored for your needs. That's my first, and very transparent, of course.
You know, and I was very surprised at actually when I've been myself in Serbia, or how advanced was the country in terms of digital asset adoption. I saw that it was way ahead compared to the rest of Europe, but this was actually broader to all Southeast Europe, especially because I think that emerging market, as you mentioned, needs to move faster. And in terms of where we are going as an industry, like a more of a forward-looking vision that you can see in the next 3-5 years, do you see an institution going from pilots to concrete platform being delivered to everyday user? How do you see the financial system being shaped in the next 3 to 5 years?
Completely see the financial system totally moving, going fully digital, especially when we're talking about emerging markets. That's the thing I already mentioned. We don't have the means to compete with larger economies. We cannot build our capital markets from scratch. But regarding digital assets, at some point, Serbia in 2020, we had the comparative advantage to move forward. Actually, we didn't use it, from my experience, in a great way. We should have done better and more. But at least now we're on the same level with other countries. You know, we're on the same level with very, I would say, and developed economies. So this is I would say, a very big opportunity for underdeveloped countries and underdeveloped economies. So it's on us to use it, and that's why I was so happy to join the World Bank on this project, to try to build the capital markets from another perspective and put it on those digital rails. The idea is not just to develop a digital market secondary platform for secondary trading. That's the first step. The overall idea is to digitalize the capital markets and to fully go to digital capital market rails.
So one interesting aspect, because we are still in 2026, which is an intense year, I would say. It's definitely been a very interesting year in terms of how it is developing across the world. Do you actually believe that there is an opportunity for the ranking of financial center in the world to move, because some emerging market could actually accelerate its growth
beyond them? Yeah. That's why you have now the I would say Game of Thrones battle between markets. Yeah. So I think now we have for the first time in a while that you have a competition between really big players and smaller ones. So actually now emerging markets are trying to find their place, while on the other hand, very developed economies are building their way in that sense. So I definitely believe that this is the time where you just need to jump on the train. If you miss it, it's gone, you know? So this is not a matter of if something will happen. It's happening. It's just a matter of time when will you join the ride. So of course you need to be in the first set of passengers if you want to succeed. Never mind if you're a big economy or a smaller one, whether you're the States or Serbia, you know.
And I think that your story here is actually consistent because technically speaking, you have the bigger economies that are much slower in terms of adopting a regulatory framework. And emerging markets had this opportunity. I would say that probably for emerging markets that are starting now, it's a bit too late. You should have started 5 years ago.
Yeah, of course.
But the thing is that Serbia moved faster, so it's already ahead in terms of now building the infrastructure because the regulatory framework has been in place for
5 years.
It's 5 years now.
Yeah, 6. Yeah.
So this actually allows now to launch this platform ahead of the bigger economies. So definitely,
I think it's great. I think it's gonna be, if everything goes as planned, I think that will put Serbia, I would say, in the spotlight regarding tokenization. So just stay tuned. I think we have some good times ahead of us.
Thank you for coming today because I think what you shared has been incredibly valuable because very few voices right now in the world have both the experience as a regulator and are also at the same time helping build an infrastructure. So this was extremely valuable, and I'm sure this insight will help a lot of the audience to engage into this digital transformation across the world. Thank you, Anina.
Thank you so much.